Before we get into today's episode, I want to proudly announce that the Stoic George podcast has secured its first ever sponsor. So thank you, Caesar, for sponsoring this video. This beautiful product right here in my hands is the Caesar Fancy Pro. This is an ultimate webcam and professional book scanner all in one. It is really cool. First of all, the design is extremely sleek. It's got a beautiful matte finish. It feels very high quality. Basically, what you can do with this, one, you can scan books and documents, which I tested out using actually a bunch of my drawings in my sketchbook, and I was really digging this. It is super easy. I was just rapid fire scanning all of these documents, and they come out really crispy and beautiful. It picks up a lot of detail. I was enjoying the black and white feeling, but you can also scan in color. Not to mention, you can also kind of point this camera at yourself this way, and boom, you have an HD webcam. So this doubles as a webcam. It's got a built-in light, so the lighting you're going to get is going to be pretty good. Really props to Caesar for making a phenomenal product, the Caesar Fancy Scanner and Webcam. It is really a good one that I am personally glad to have as part of my desk setup. So check out the Caesar Fancy Pro using the link in my description. And once again, thank you so much to Caesar for being the premier sponsor of the Stoic George podcast. I really appreciate it. And now let's get into the episode. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 17 of the Stoic George podcast. My name is George, and I'm your host. This is a podcast about my spiritual journey, just updates about my life and what I'm going through. And I consider it to be my spiritual safe space, my spiritual safe space for creative expression about what I'm going through spiritually and in life. And the way I see life is that everything at the end of the day is of spiritual concern. It's all connected, and that's really beautiful. So yeah, I love the opportunity to reflect on this podcast. I keep needing to remind myself that this podcast doesn't have to be good. I think that one of the things that we can get really stuck up on in life is the feeling that we need to be good at everything that we do, especially when it comes to creative things. It really destroys the joy when you feel like you need to be good at every creative thing you pick up. There's a lot of repetition in this podcast. I've mentioned my guitar hobby a lot, but it's like not giving a shit how good I am is letting me just really enjoy it. And it makes it so that when I pick up the guitar, it's about each individual strum. It's about the sensation of learning and playing and hearing the music in that moment. It's not about reaching some destination. It's not about being in a band one day. It's not about getting better. It's simply about the act of playing the guitar in that moment. This is a mindset that makes it really, really beautiful to be a beginner. And in a sense, I'm a beginner at this podcast. And it's also, I don't want to attach to this idea of making this into a big podcast or a successful podcast. I think this neurotic goal setting that we can do with creative hobbies and with other things in life, same with meeting people. It's like we set these expectations that when we meet someone that it's going to become a long-term relationship, for example, but it's like there is a way in which you can just let things flow and enjoy them in the moment. This is something that my spiritual journey has been teaching me, and it's hard. I have more unlearning to do because it gets so ingrained in us in a capitalist society that everything we do must be to achieve an end, to become successful, to accomplish something so that we have another accomplishment under our belt. It's a relentless hamster wheel that I am trying to step off of, but I keep struggling with this podcast. It's like I overthink time and time again. I overthink, do I have enough to say? Do I have the right things to say? Things like this. But every time I sit down and open myself and try to remember that it's about this spontaneous moment, this is a act of spontaneous creation. I start to feel a little bit better, and that's very nice. So, what's going on with me? I have a few notes here to help guide me a little bit. I put up a photo of Ram Dass in my room, which feels like a step for me because it's I guess I have a little Buddha planter up on a shelf over there above my bed. That's kind of like the first. Actually, I guess there's more. I'm trying to think if I've like put up like physical spiritual reminders in my space before, and I have the Buddha planter. I have some notes inspired by The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron on the topic that I just brought up, and I've definitely read this before, but I'm just going to allow myself to repeat myself on this podcast. The need to be a great artist makes it hard to be an artist. The need to produce a great work of art makes it hard to produce any art at all. That's a quote by Julia Cameron, and isn't that damn true? It's like with the guitar, if I had this need to be a great guitar player, I would be so intimidated to pick it up and start tinkering around like I have been. And it's cool because I have seen so much progress on the guitar, and it's really beautiful. And it's beautiful to be progressing, but not giving a shit about progressing at the same time. And I have something in my notes along these lines recently, and I've still just been relentlessly writing all of my ideas down in my notes app. And I used to feel like my ideas and my creative output had to be so well organized and, all in one journal or this or that, or all in one YouTube video per week, or, I just felt like I needed to control my creativity. But now it's like my notes app is a big, gigantic mess. And anytime I'm out and about and I have an idea, I'll open a new note, I'll write it down, and I'll just leave it there. And I don't cling to the idea. I'm not like, oh, I need to capture this idea and put it on TikTok or make sure I get it out in the podcast. The notes app is one way that I open the flow of creativity. And yeah, it's just this gigantic mess of notes. Here's one, not the one I was just thinking of. See yourself as a tree, not a thing to be judged, a thing to be allowed to be and allowed to grow in its natural beauty. These are the little observations I have as I'm listening to lectures, going about my day, and anything that pops in my head, I'll write it down in my notes app. Sometimes it ends up in the journal, which I have right here in front of me. Still doing the morning pages every single morning. Creativity for me has become about simply opening the flow, and I'm not overthinking what tools I use, what medium I put my creative output on. It doesn't really matter. It's about being creative. And I'm proud of myself for the fact that has really been sinking in, because I used to be so attached to how my creativity performed online, which was a sad place to be. There's a note I was looking for. What was it about? Attachment or something? Oh, accomplishment. Here's the note. I don't care. I should say I no longer care to accomplish anything. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But whether I do or not is irrelevant. How beautiful. How beautiful that I've come to this place. I don't care. I don't care if this podcast is successful. I don't care if I can be a social media influencer for however much longer. I don't care how much money I make. I don't care if I achieve the American dream. I don't care. I'm open to all of these things. I'm open to whatever in my path is the right thing, but I'm not attached to it, and I don't care. I am very happy to be exactly where I am. This is the kind of place that my spiritual journey has brought me to, and I can tell you, to compare where I'm at today to where I was at a couple years ago, I was really stressed. I was really anxious about making sure I had a successful career and making sure I made enough money and making sure I was making sure people liked me, things like this. Now I just don't care, and I still love my life. It's so beautiful. It's more beautiful now. Actually, I enjoy my life a lot more because it's more playful. But yeah, I've dropped this attachment to accomplishment that we are ingrained into as we grow up in this society. And it's pretty damn cool. You know, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that my life has, for some reason put me on the spiritual path. The spiritual path is a part of my karma. I don't know how I ended up here. I ended up here because of things way outside of my control, because of how my ancestors were raised and how they raised their kids and their kids and their kids, and eventually my parents, and then how I was raised. And for some reason, I'm here in New York City, in America, in Brooklyn. For some reason, I have creative impulses that were strong enough for me to follow. I had enough anxiety that pushed me to try to stop being anxious, that pushed me towards a spiritual path that I became obsessed with, that taught me a lot of lessons that I'm applying to my life now in adulthood. That all of this is bringing me to this place of kind of realizing the infinite and realizing what it really means to be free. And what it really means to be free is to let go of who you thought you were, as Ram Dass would put it. It means to realize that you can be anyone. I've been saying this phrase over and over and over again, and it's really come to define my findings. And it's that I am nobody, therefore I can be anybody. I think that this is true freedom, because there's no more boxes to be stuck into. I'm no longer a skater. I'm no longer a student. I'm no longer a young adult. I'm no longer a man. I'm no longer a child of parents. I'm no longer, obviously in one plane of reality, I can still identify with all these things, but I'm not completely sucked in with them anymore. And this is really something I went through with skateboarding that I've been talking about a lot. It's like, the skateboarding over identification is really one of them that sent me into a crisis. And now I see that over identification with any aspect of your identity is a prison, and it's never fun to be in that prison. It can be fun for a while, but the natural human waves of change that come over us will eventually wash over us, and we're going to want to change, and to be stuck with a particular label, whatever it may be, is not going to feel very good. Do I hear the cat meowing? Maybe. Speaking of the cat, I've been thinking about, we kind of have a cat now. Her name is Pocket. We call her Pickles on occasion. And as I look at this cat, I've been really feeling the sensation that this cat knows something that we do not know. Like, this cat is pure consciousness. This cat is completely living in the moment, following her impulses moment by moment. When she's hungry, she eats. When she's sleepy, she sleeps. When whatever else she does, whatever else. She simply follows and trusts her intuition. There's no second layer of questioning. Like, we as humans, we have the intuition that a cat has. Like, we are alive in this planet and we have guiding impulses in our body. But since we also have an intellect, and since in our society we over prioritize the intellect, whenever we have a natural impulse, we question it and we put it under scrutiny of our reason, and we overthink and try to logically analyze, is this impulse correct? And this is, am I talking too loud? This is a great tool. This can be a great tool if you have those goals that society raises us to have. And if you want to achieve things, like, yes, you can scrutinize your intuition and sometimes ignore it and sometimes listen to it so that you can reach this particular outcome. But I've come to the place where it's like, how the hell are we supposed to know what outcome is best for us? Who are we to think that we know the right outcome for us. If you think about the infinity of outcomes our lives can possibly take, who are we to think that we know which one is best for us? And when you open yourself to the fact that maybe the universe has a plan for you, maybe the universe knows what's best for us, or something deeper than our intellect knows what's best for us, then you can stop over prioritizing the intellect. You can listen to your intuition. You can become more like the cat. And this is it takes a lot of unlearning to get here, because the cat is not going to succeed in capitalistic society. And if you truly want to succeed in capitalistic society, who knows? Maybe your intuition does not line up with capitalism per se. I think our intuition, since money is tied to survival, I think our intuition is strong enough to get our survival needs met. But I don't know that our intuition is going to guide us towards having a mansion and the best car and the best material possessions, because I don't think that's what we were created for. I think our intuition knows how to guide us towards, firstly, survival, but then love, peace, and joy, and togetherness and connection and fulfillment of the soul's purpose. So yeah, letting the intellect be a tool instead of an overbearing master opens you up to the intuition. And I think it's crazy that I just got into all that talking about the cat. But yeah, the cat knows. I've been saying that to myself almost as a joke. And something I appreciate myself is that I do find the humor in sometimes how ridiculous the things I say sound. And I've been just, as I'm hanging out with the roommates, I'll just randomly be like, yo guys, like the cat knows. And I'll laugh. But underneath it, I'm like kind of being dead serious. Yeah, like the cat doesn't overthink. At least not my cat. I don't know. Maybe you guys have an anxious cat in your house, but yeah, the cat knows. And what made me start thinking about that is in the Ram Dass book, Be Here Now, there's a page in the brown section that just says the chicken sees. And you want to know something funny about the spiritual journey is, and maybe I'll just grab this book for reference. If you're watching the video, you'll see me holding it. There's these white pages, which is just like normal writing. And then these brown pages, which if you're not well versed in the spiritual journey, just look absolutely ridiculous and look like they're written by someone with schizophrenia. But the more spiritual I get, the more this brown section actually makes perfect sense. And the chicken sees started to make sense to me, at least on the same lines as that cat analogy. I was like, oh yeah, maybe the chicken does see something that we do not. And I think a good measure of where you're at in the spiritual journey is how much the brown pages in Be Here Now make sense. So that's a fun experiment if you want to try. When I picked up this book, I skipped right on through the brown pages. I thought they were just stupid. But now they're extremely meaningful to me. Even this page. The big ice cream cone in the sky. I shit you not. There's a page that says, the big ice cream cone in the sky. Will it ever be an eternal ice cream cone? Or is it always going to melt? Maybe this one I don't understand off the top of my head, but I think you get my point. And I'm sure if I thought about it a little bit more, I could start to understand it. But speaking of the understanding of spirituality, something I want to do in this podcast is kind of update you guys about the books that I'm reading. And real quick, I'm going to blow my nose. And now I'm writing down timestamps where I need to do edits. So that's good for me. And I really do hope I remember to edit this, because the way in which I just blew my nose was really embarrassing. But I know sometimes I'll just put all this footage in the timeline and just say, fuck it, and just post the whole thing raw. So I am almost done with Zen Buddhism by D.T. Suzuki, a collection edited by William Barrett. And there's a lot in here about how the Zen masters teach. And a lot of their teaching is defined by literally nonsensical sentences, like things that literally make no sense. Let's see if I could find one. Just flip through here. This is a great book, by the way, for anyone on the spiritual path. If you're intrigued by Buddhism, this one really gets into it, gets into some history of Zen, some of the mindsets of Zen, things like that. And as I was reading this book, I really, really felt an opening effect on me. And that's something I've come to learn too, is that a good way to judge whether something is quote unquote good for you is if it has an opening effect. If something opens your mind, makes you see more, makes you expand your definition of who you are or who you may be, that's typically a good force. Whereas things that make you feel restrictive, constricted, imprisoned, these are typically things you want to increase your space from. That applies to literature, people in your life, etc. Things that have an opening effect. People, when you're around someone who opens you and you feel like you can be anybody, those are the people that you want in your life. And I'm looking for... yes, here we go. Okay, here's an example of a Zen teaching that makes no sense. A monk asked Tung Shan, "Who is the Buddha?" To which Tung Shan responded, 3 chin of flax. So this makes no logical sense. And the reason being is that Zen is trying to teach us to stop over prioritizing our intellect, our logical, rational mind, because especially in the West, we are obsessed with rationalizing everything. We want to make logical, rational sense of everything. These Zen teachings are intended to destroy the root of life, to make the calculating mind die, essentially catapult you into the present moment, is what I understand. The Zen teachings make so little logical sense that, and I'm looking for a quote here, you burst out into one's consciousness by overstepping the limits of consciousness. There's something in here about the knife of logic is not sharp enough to cut through these. So you need to think, you need to use a different mechanism to understand these, what they call koans, which are those nonsensical statements. You can't use your logic. You need to use something else. And that something else is pure and utter presence, or Buddha mind. That's so cool. How did I even get into this? I feel like this happens a lot in this podcast. I will get into things and I'm like, how did I even get into this? Oh yeah, I was probably just talking about the book. Yeah, Zen Buddhism book. Zen seems pretty intense. It's like you're really the goal of Zen is to really fucking be so present that you're completely unclouded by your preconceived notions of the world. Almost when I read about Zen Buddhism, it's like, it sounds like the goal is to naturally induce a permanent psychedelic state. Because I think in a psychedelic state, at least in my experience, I think I do see things truly as they are without my preconceived notions. And I think I do operate more like the cat does, where I feel my intuition and I simply follow it and I don't question it and I don't over rationalize it. And I'm not even thinking about, if I go deep enough into the psychedelic experience, which has happened once, I'm not even thinking about how I'm perceived. I'm not self-conscious at all. I'm just following the intuition that I feel naturally in that moment. Basically living as the Buddha. To finish the reading update, I'll just share a few books that I just bought. Basically, the way my reading habit works is like once I hear about a book that calls to me, I order it immediately. And you can kind of, if you're watching the video, you can see this stack of books. That's a bunch of examples of that sensation. And I have 3 more here, these that I'm particularly excited about. This one is The Journey of Awakening by Ram Dass. This one is The Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert. And Richard Alpert would later become Ram Dass, if you didn't know. And The Myth of Freedom and the Way of Meditation by Chogyam Trungpa, who his book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism had a big impact on me and my journey, so I'm excited to read more of his thoughts. I don't know which of those I'm going to get to next, and the purpose of me sharing these books is simply just to share the resources that I'm using to come to this understanding that I'm continuing to develop. Yeah, and I also, if you didn't know, I have an essential reading list linked in the description of the podcast. And that kind of goes through all the books that I consider to be essential on my journey to reach the mindset that I currently have. And this includes books that I read when I was like really still stuck and trapped in, you know, how I was raised by society. And I really thought that I was somebody. I thought I was a skater, a college student, somebody working on this career, etc. You know, I have the books that started to break me out of that illusion, which I think is really cool. And I'm trying to document them all chronologically as best I can so that I may inspire others to step forth on their journey. So I've been thinking about the phases of the spiritual journey, and I think when I started to understand that I was not who I thought I was, I became extremely obsessed with spirituality. And I think I still am in that phase to an extent, but I almost got caught in another trap, which was making spirituality my new identity. I think Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Trungpa that I just read was really important for making me aware of that potential trap. I don't think I got fully into it, but I think I could have if I wasn't careful. But I think I'm in the phase of being obsessed with spirituality, and I think there are going to be some people out there who being obsessed with spirituality is their calling or their purpose in the world. You know, these people, they're going to share what they learn. They're going to learn more and more and share it. And in a way, that's what I'm doing now. So that could be one of my purposes. I mean, my creative impulses tend to be about the spiritual journey. You know, you think of people like the Beatles. That's a great example. It's like they are operating in the physical plane, sharing their spiritual journeys to other people. That's really cool. But I think there are Buddhas out there who are not necessarily meant to preach or be obsessed with spirituality. I think the end goal of Buddhism or spirituality is to be able to fully integrate into your life without overthinking it, without adding unnecessary layers of suffering, overthinking, over-rationalizing. It's to just be in your life. I think my spiritual journey, first of all, I think I used to be in my life, but it was in such a painful and anxious way. You know, I was so caught up in making sure I was successful that it basically made me miserable. And I think my spiritual journey required like a big step back from that. You know, as an example, I needed to take a break from skateboarding because I was too much of a skateboarder. And I needed to take a step back to figure out this spiritual lesson of non-attachment, of non-over-identification. I think for a while I've been more socially isolated as I was trying to figure out who I was outside of the context of other people. Really this summer I took like a break from love, because especially when it comes to loving and romantic relationships, just like skateboarding, and it's all so connected, I would get too close and I would over-identify, again, the same thing. So I needed a break from that to see who I was outside of all these contexts. And the habit of over-identifying with things as part of our identity is so ingrained. I think for me and for a lot of people on the path, there's going to be a phase where you really withdraw from your life. I don't think this is sad. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I also don't think it's the destination of the spiritual journey. I think it may be an important step on many of our paths. But I think ultimately what spirituality is about being in your life fully. So I think that phase of separation, where maybe in that phase of separation you're really obsessed with spirituality, really studying, really spending a lot of time alone to inquire into the nature of your own being, maybe reading about spirituality, maybe watching a lot of lectures, maybe your TikTok algorithm becomes all about spirituality. I think these phases go hand in hand, and I think eventually, as the lessons and the learning start to integrate and the space you've taken from people, from things that you've over-identified with, when that all starts to sink in and you start to understand your nature being that you are not who you thought you were, that you are nobody, that you can be anybody. I think as these things start to sink in, then it is time to integrate them back into your life, back into the life that is in front of you. There's going to be a time to step out of withdrawal and step back in to the sauce of life, to really get in there and trust that your body has learned and retained the lessons that you learned by being alone, by studying spirituality. Then it's time to do it, to come back, to really do it and use the things that you've learned to really fully be in your life. I think I'm personally starting to enter this phase because I felt ready to get back into skateboarding. I felt ready to start relating to people, to get closer to people again, maybe to love other people again, and to not be so separated. I feel like the spiritual lessons have integrated enough to where I trust that I know them now. You know, it's not about having written them all down. It's like this intuitive understanding, and this confidence that now I know, like, nobody, not even myself, can put me back into a box, because now I know, I get it. And so since I know so deeply, I can safely re-enter life without backtracking. And maybe I will backtrack and then I'll withdraw again, and maybe that's the flow of it. But yeah. I think something I've been thinking about. It's like there's a phase of spiritual obsession that I think comes with withdrawal from life, or at least it did for me. But this is only a step on the path, and the step is leading towards a joyous reintegration with the life in front of you. And I think that is so beautiful and exciting. So beautiful and exciting. On that note, man, I'm out of breath. I'm like getting fucking excited. Can you tell I love talking about this stuff? I want to talk about that in regards to other people, relationships, friendships, because it's something that I think about a lot, and I'm sure all of us do. But yeah, as I was discovering that I was nobody, it became really hard for me to lean into relationships, because I think that most people out there, when you walk out into the world, unless you've like really found your community of spiritually minded people, most people think they're somebody based on their accomplishments, etc. But the problem that I found is people who think they're somebody, they think you are somebody too. And whether they know it or not, they try to enforce that somebodyness on you by asking questions about who you are, by coming up with a picture of who you are in their heads. And then they kind of subconsciously enforce that upon you and limit your freedom. And it's like around some people who think this way, it's hard to be completely free, to be anybody, to be expansive. This ties to what I was saying about people who you feel open and expansive around. You hold on to those people because they're rare, because you feel so free and light and joyous around them. And it's like your light can glow because they're not putting you into a box that you've already worked so hard to get yourself out of. It's like you work hard to get yourself out of the box, then other people become the problem, right? So for a time there, I didn't have enough. The spiritual lessons did not integrate deeply enough to where if I was around people, I would start to feel like I was back in that box, because their idea of who I was still impacting me, and I started to listen to them, right? So this is what kept me more isolated for a time. And I'm just going to read this from my notes. But I understand now that this is where they are on their path, and that's okay. I can let them be who they are, but I can also set up my own boundaries so that they don't drain me. We can still coexist. So what I mean by that is like, okay, I feel it when somebody defines me in a narrow way. I just feel it. I feel it. I feel inhibited. I feel stuck. I like to be around people who don't have this limited idea of who I am. I like to be around people who are open to whoever I may be. I've become open to whoever I may be, and it's intoxicating. So I want to be around other people who grant me that freedom of self and expression as well. But what I've learned about the people who are not at that level of consciousness yet, it's that like, okay, I don't have to be mad at them. I don't have to completely remove myself from their lives. I can accept them and where they're at on their journey. That's their karma right now. I'm living in my karma with my current understandings. All I really have to do to coexist with everybody is just set up boundaries. You know, I can take a little bit more space from people who aren't ready to let me completely expand, you know, to be a being of infinite expansion. When I sense that clinging and that someone has a model for who I'm supposed to be, I can choose to set boundaries. And this is the mature way of relating. You know, I can take the space that I need to so that I still feel completely free. And this is not a total social isolation. It's a balancing act with each individual relationship that you simply intuit and you feel out. And if you feel expansive around somebody, that's great. You lean into that. And if you feel inhibited by somebody and the models they may have for you in their own head, that's not my problem. And I can set up boundaries and choose to, take the space I need to so that I may still be free. That's kind of where I'm at with that now. This actually speaks to my obsession with Ram Dass. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this publicly. The first clip I ever saw of Ram Dass, period, was about human relationships, particularly loving relationships and dating. And it was this little clip of a lecture on YouTube, actually the background of the lecture. And I'm going to write down this timestamp to remember to put the photo I have of Ram Dass up on the video. the photo that I printed out is from that video. So it was very impactful for me. And this is the first time I ever heard Ram Dass speak, and it just spoke so directly to my soul. And he spoke about, you're going to hear a lot of overlapping language, which I don't think is a problem, by the way. Like, Ram Dass is channeling Maharaji's wisdom, and maybe now I'm channeling Ram Dass's wisdom. I don't see anything wrong with that. Anyways, a little moment of defensiveness. In this little clip, and I'll try to remember to link it below as well, Ram Dass speaks of the idea of allowing in relationships, of truly fully, when someone is in your presence, letting them be themselves, dropping your idea of who they are. Because when we have an idea of who somebody is and we're around them, we subconsciously enforce that idea upon them. It's this whole thing I've been talking about. I think I've been very sensitive to when other people put me in a box for a long, long time, but I never quite knew that this was a spiritual concern, that this was something, I've always had this intuition, but I never really knew what to do about it. I never knew how to identify what was going on. Ram Dass gave words to this. He gave me an understanding of this, that some people think you're somebody and they try to enforce that and they limit you. Whereas you can choose to completely let the people around you be completely free. And that's where real beautiful, loving relationships happen, because they come out of the intuitive flow of the universe, instead of this sense of obligation that we're obsessed with as Westerners. It's like, when you meet someone, like I was saying earlier, and it's always easier to talk about this in a dating setting. It's like you hit it off on a date, you start to form this picture of how this person's going to fit into your life, and thereby you limit them. But if you just open to the flow of it, let them be exactly who they are moment by moment, and don't project so far out into the future, and don't cling so much onto this idea of how they can serve your life, that's when two people really let each other be free. And then when there's a love drawing two together, it's completely natural, harmonious, in the flow of the universe, not forced, not clinging, just purely based in love and beauty. That is, hearing Ram Dass articulate this, that I just tried to re-articulate, and I highly recommend everybody listen to. That's what put me onto Ram Dass, and it's this idea I've been thinking about for a long time. And when I heard that lecture, I was like, holy shit, like this has been real. Like I had this intuition, and I'm kind of validated. It's like, yeah, I do want to be around people who are capable of holding an expansive idea of me, and I want that to go both ways, so that we may both be free with each other. I don't like relationships that are based in an arbitrary societal feeling of obligation because we're supposed to, and because this relationship is supposed to last this amount of time, and because we're supposed to see each other this many times per week or whatever. That has never sat well with me. And isn't it so cool how all of this stuff is connected? Like, everything I talk about in this podcast, I always get the sensation of like how connected it all is. Like, I'm sort of always talking about the same thing. This idea of, I don't even know if it's worth defining, because it's everything I talk about, all the life experiences that I try to process, they all come down to the truth, the infinite, whatever you want to call it. They come down to being the Buddha, to being free, to not being stuck in who you think you are, to expanding. To not being stuck in the plane of consciousness that we're raised in, the capitalistic Western limited view of consciousness. It's all sort of about the same thing. The identity crisis I went through with skateboarding, the attachment to accomplishments, the way I see dating and relationships, it's all kind of the same thing. How cool is that? Um, do I have anything else to say? I could get into the people pleasing. It's very connected as well. Okay, and speaking of how all of this is connected, I think this is all really connected to people pleasing as well. And I identify as someone who has been a people pleaser and still struggles with people pleasing now and then. And I think this thing I talk about of like how we're raised to be success and achievement driven and future focused and, wanting to get people to like us so that we can, get the job or get the idea of the relationship that we have in our heads to work out. I think this is where people pleasing comes from. It comes from needing to prove yourself, it comes from needing to achieve something or to accomplish something or to do a good job in order to be someone, right? When we grow up, we're asked the question, who do we want to be when we grow up? Which implies that in order to be somebody, we need to prove ourselves by accomplishing something, by, getting a college degree in a field or whatever so that we can become a computer scientist, something like this. I think that this instills people pleasing because suddenly you cannot just be free. You are not allowed to just be. You suddenly have to prove something to someone, to society, to this, even to yourself. So you start doing things that you don't want to do in order to figure out how to be somebody for the sake of someone else or for the sake of society. That's where I think people pleasing is rooted in. And that's why I think it's so hard to unlearn. And that's why I think people pleasing is a spiritual concern. And I think that's why as I've become more spiritual and started to understand these lessons, I've started to actually heal my people pleasing. And an example is what I just said. This way in which when I'm around people who don't allow me to expand, now I understand that I can simply just take the space I need from those people. Whereas I maybe used to feel like I had to prove something to them or I owed them something in order to get them to like me. But now it's like this understanding of everyone is at their own place in their respective journeys. I'm in my place and I can, I don't need to isolate, but I can take space from those who are not serving my place on my journey and my continued progression on my journey. And that's perfectly okay. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I have like more notes potentially for a whole episode I could do about people pleasing and how I've learned to combat it, but I'm starting to burn out on energy here. And, if I've learned anything on my spiritual path, it's to trust the flow of things. So I'm just going to do that and wrap up this episode here. This was a nice one that, I always appreciate the opportunity to open the creative channel, talk about what I'm going through, try to synthesize what I'm going through and share it. And hopefully it's serving some sort of purpose for you. I very much appreciate you for giving me the space to listen or the space to express myself. And, on the note of relationships, in a sense, me and you, the listener, are in a relationship of some kind. You're listening to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is in a way for you. So, and I've been through so many changes. Maybe you have been with me since my era where I was really attached to my identity of being a skateboarding YouTuber. And if that is you, thank you for granting me the space to change and expand. That's like one of the most beautiful things you can do for somebody. And I really appreciate it. And even if you're new on the journey, thanks in advance for allowing me to work through all these thoughts and to grow and change with them. Because, change is a part of me and it feels good to be amongst those who allow me to be free. And yeah, so a little moment of gratitude there. I am very grateful for you for listening. I think I'm stumbling over my words and it is time to press that stop record button. But yeah, just wanted to say that. And I always feel like I need to plug things to help me make money, but you can find everything in the description if you want to support me or buy some merch or anything like that. And yeah, all my merch is still like skateboarding design focused, but eventually I think I want to do a journal, a Stoic George journal, as well as like a Stoic George line of merch. So stay tuned for that. Oh, I did want to say, I think I want to start posting snippets from my morning pages, like my private journal entries onto Patreon. So maybe that's a good incentive for you to support me financially, which I would appreciate. But yeah, so going to be sharing some journal entries now and then. With that all said, Godspeed on your respective journeys, wherever you're at. I'm pretty sure you're exactly where you're meant to be. There's nowhere else than where you are, so I don't see how anything else could be true. So yeah, all right, I'll see you next week.